So today we're going to talk about some of my absolute favorite Gundam ball drops by Bandai Namco. Now the reason why I say this is I've been a Gundam fan since Gundam Wing came to the U.S. So I'm pretty much a first generation American Gundam fan, and I've been riding the wave for years. And it's to the point to where I have almost every show on DVD, and I got as many of the Japanese and American games as I can within an affordable means. So along that lines, let's dive into it and let's talk about some of the greatest Gundam ball drops. Now we're gonna go ahead and start with the obvious. The obvious is that when Gundam started getting imported to the U.S. during the early 2000s, it all started with Gundam Wing. When Gundam Wing was extremely popular, it branched off into G Gundam. G Gundam branched off into 8th MS Team. It branched off into random things. You know, it's like, and then they started like diving into the UC. So like Mobile Suit Gundam, 8th MS Team. They had 0083, like all these shows. But while Gundam was popular, they did certain things. So they imported some of the mangas, but they didn't import any of the mangas from Gundam Wing. They brought over some random mangas that were just hit or miss. They were just bad choices. And during the popularity, they brought over a bunch of the shows, but they also left a bunch of the shows out. For example, we never got Victory Gundam. And it's really weird to say that this franchise is something that we would have missed. And I know it might have had something to do with the main creator not liking the franchise, liking that particular series, because you know he had burnout at that point. But we never got that one. We also never got Turn A. It took years for us to get Turn A on DVD, and of course my personal favorite, because I could not find this particular series, X. After War Gundam X is another series that we didn't get. Now in Japan, this particular series flopped. Like they ended up having to cancel it, and they ended up having to go into a different project. So I guess they just assumed that we would have never liked it, even though it's a really good story. It definitely doesn't deserve the criticism that it gets, and it's kind of sad that we never got to experience it for years. Now another ball drop that that Bandai did that they were very famous for was the lack of DVD sales. So Bandai was all over the place when it came to DVDs. So say for example, we got Gundam Wing as a collection right here, and it's fairly decent. You know, it's a nice one. But after a certain bit, Bandai stopped doing decent DVD collections, and he started partnering with this company, which is Right Stuff. And you can actually recognize their logo, which is right there. They only make stuff in limited quantity. So, for example, I was able to find this in the wild. You know, able to go to like a Best Buy or a Walmart. They had Gundam. But after a certain point, certain Gundam shows became super rare because they partnered with a company that only made limited sets. So they would only make so many sets. They wouldn't like continuously make them. And because of that, the Gundam aftermarket blew up because all the DVDs sold out because they were trying to sell them for a premium. And then that premium turned into a premium. So you had DVDs that were going for like $30-$40 at the store, all of a sudden being worth $80 to $100 on eBay because Right Stuff didn't make enough of the copies. So that was a really interesting scenario that a billion-dollar company would put themselves into that situation with one of their star IPs. Just imagine Dragon Ball Z being as popular as it is, not being on DVD and being on a very, very expensive aftermarket. That's pretty much what happened here. All because Bandai didn't even do their due diligence trying to see how many copies were going to be made. Now, outside of that, we had the video game realm. So video games during the Gundam Wing and, Gundam Wing, G Gundam, they got 0083, you have 8th MS team. So pretty much like the Toonami era. Like all this stuff during that time frame sold really well. Really well. So we had a couple of Gundam games. Like we had a Gundam game on the Dreamcast that did fairly decent, even though it was a failing system. We have a bunch of Gundam games on the PlayStation. So we had Battle Assault 1, which ended up being pretty rare, but we had Battle Assault number 2, which became extremely popular. And then, of course, we also ended up having games on the PlayStation 2. Like Federation versus Xeon. Of course, you had like SD Gundam Force and those kind of things. But Bandai being as neglectful as they are, the franchise starting to flounder. And it all happened around Gundam Seed. So they released Gundam Seed. Gundam Seed was fairly popular, but the people that watched Toonami at that time couldn't really find any more Gundam material, like on DVDs or VHSs or anything. So the Gundam fad rose really high and it burned really bad because Bandai made certain mistakes. So first mistake was they only had Gundam Seed on TV. That was it. That was all you could really find. And all the other shows just kind of like faded into obscurity, even though people loved them. And then you had Gundam toys on the shelves. So the Gundam toys that we had, because in the West, we apparently were too dumb for model kits, so we had to go with the toys. And the toys we had were Mobile Suit Gundam, we had G Gundam, we had Gundam Wing. We started going into Gundam Seed, and of course then it started falling off. And then so the toys started failing. The shows started failing. They had a card game that was pretty popular. That ended up doing all of Gundam Wing and ended up doing some of Mobile Suit Gundam. That ended up failing because they weren't investing too much into it. And then the video game realm started failing too. See, once they made the transition between PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3, Bandai did what every Japanese company does, and they partnered with a Japanese company only for exclusives. And ended up having games like this. So, Mobile Suit Gundam Crossfire, which is a fairly decent game. It's not the best. But this was a launch title on the PlayStation 3. Now, in hindsight, we all look at the PlayStation 3 and we're like, oh, that's a fairly good system. It played DVDs. Like, it was a fun system. But the problem was the PlayStation 3 was $600 at launch. $600. Consoles nowadays aren't that expensive. And this is in 2006. That's how much the PlayStation 3 launched for. And Bandai partnered for just them for an exclusive. Yeah, just them. This game is only available on the PlayStation 3. And Bandai doesn't re-release games. It is their MO. They will not re-release a game no matter how popular it is. They absolutely refuse. I guess they just burn the digital files when they're done. Because that's the vibe I get from this. But it's absolutely insane. And then after that, they started having other games like this that they refused to import to the US. So this is Mobile Suit Gundam Side Stories. And this is a collection of multiple Gundam games. Just on here, you have Mobile Suit Gundam Side Story Blue Destiny, which is a Sega Saturn exclusive. You had Gundam Side Story 0079. You had Zeonic Front, which we did get, proud of us. And then, of course, we also had Gundam Lost War Chronicles. If that sounds familiar, that's because we got the manga, but we never got the game. And that's why the manga didn't sell well, is we didn't have any tie-ins to understand what was going on. And of course, we had Gundam Side Story, and we had Mobile Suit Gundam Cross Dimension 0079, which is a Super Nintendo game that we never got as well. So this entire collection, except for 2 games, are games we never got. And Bandai never thought to translate this, because Gundam fans clearly are interested in that kind of thing. I can't make this up. I can make multiple videos about Bandai and just some of the amazingly bad market strategies they use for Gundam. Absolutely bad. And then they wonder why Gundam isn't popular in the West, when they made not even half the commitment they made for Dragon Ball. Not even half of it. And Gundam's a bigger franchise, which is insane because you figure there'd be more money for them. Well, Bandai is always going to be Bandai in my books.